Okay, hi there. This is Scott Williamson here from PelletStoveService.com, and for this little video I am going to show you how a Harman control board works. Um, the control boards are pretty much all the same on the newer models, and they've now started to make control boards that are pretty much interchangeable within all the product lines, just by switching some dip switches and such in the back. Most of you are going to have a nice, modern, really cool looking Harman. I am using my Invincible insert here. Now this was put out quite some time ago and actually came with a different control board. I'm using the same faceplate, but I have changed my Invincible over to auto ignition, which it didn't come with originally. It would have been a manual light stove. And so the differences are that my control board over here didn't have this toggle switch for the igniter, and I busted a hole through there so the toggle switch could come through. The up position, where it is right now, is going to be for automatic, meaning that it will automatically light, and the down will be the manual, meaning that I would have to manually light the stove. And there should be one more light right over here for the igniter. It's on my stove on the control board, but there's no hole cut out for it there, so you're not going to see that illuminate. So I'm going to put this in the auto position. And as you can see right now, there's no power to the stove because I don't have it plugged in. When you plug in the Harmans, you will see that the power light has come on, and we're getting a status blinking there that went off. Okay, that's fine. So everything's ready to go now. To start this stove, basically you have to select which mode of operation that you're going to be working the stove in. And it has two modes. It has room temperature, stove temperature. To go to room temperature, you turn the dial up, and to do stove temp, you turn the dial down. Now you will notice that when I turned it on to the room temp, it doesn't start. That's because I have it set for 70 degrees, and it's warmer than 70 degrees in here. And if I turn it this way, we get no start. But once I cross the room threshold temperature, you'll see that the status light comes on, feed motor comes on, combustor motor comes on, and in fact the igniter light came on too, but you can't see it. And we can turn that off. When you're using the stove in room temperature mode, you're going to be using the degrees on the outside of the circle to set your set point for the room. If you are using the stove in stove temperature mode, down on the bottom, you're going to be using 1 through 7 on this dial over here. Basically the differences are that when you're using the outside in room temp, you're using this thermistor probe here to measure the temperature of the room. And the stove is going to be in 4 different modes at any given time. It's either going to be off, like it is right now, or it's going to be starting up, or it's going to be shutting down, or it's going to be off. It's going to be doing one of those 4 things at any given time in room temperature mode. And actually between turning off and achieving room temperature, it's actually going to be idling too. So it's going to be off, starting up, idling, or shutting down. And when the stove starts in room temperature, it's going to start feeding, and once the fire actually happens inside the stove, when our temperature gets to about 175, 185 degrees in the exhaust path, the distribution blower is going to come on, and then that will be blowing the air into the room. When it's calling for heat, the status light will be on. When it's not calling for heat, the status light will be off. On stove temperature, the status light is always on, regardless of where you are. And on stove temperature, you're not using this probe. You're just using the ESP in the stove. And at 1, you're trying to achieve and maintain 325 degrees in the exhaust path. And on 7, you're trying to achieve and maintain 500 degrees in the exhaust path. And everything between 7 and 1 is just a variable between 325 and 500. On stove temperature, the stove is burning at a steady clip, and it's not rising or falling or idling or shutting off, it's just staying there. On room temperature, it is going to be in one of 4 different modes. Now there are some other controls here that we have to know. Up here you'll see that we have a feed adjustment. Right now we have it set for 3. 3 is a good setting for hardwood pellets. And if you move it up to say 4, it's going to increase the feed rate. And if you move it down to 2, it's going to decrease the feed rate. And the reason why this is important is that not all fuels burn at the same exact rate. So this allows you to be able to add a little bit more or restrict it a little bit more so that when the stove is in the idle position, the fire does not go out. So that it's always feeding in the minimal amount of pellets that it needs to actually be able to maintain the combustion. And if you have it, say, on a 4 or 5 and the stove can't keep up with the burn, you'll actually notice the pellets falling off of the edge of the burn pot. And if you ever see that, then you want to turn your feed rate down just a little bit. Basic rule of thumb, 3 would be for hardwoods, 4 I generally use for softwood pellets, and I generally never use 5 or 6 or 1 or 2. And then there's this white shaded area down here below 1, and if we turn that on, you'll see that all of the lights illuminate on the control board. And that will turn everything on the stove on high for about 45 seconds, and then everything on the stove is going to go down to low for 45 seconds, and then it's going to cycle through distribution, combustion, feed motor, distribution, combustion, feed motor. It's going to do that on low, do it on high, and then it's going to repeat the pattern around again. And we use that for diagnostics when we're trying to test if something is wrong with the stove. And the 2 last bits that we need to go through here is on your different modes, either room temp or stove temp, the distance between L and H is the velocity of the distribution fan right here that circulates the air in the room. So you can have a low fan or you can have high fan. You may notice that the fan might cycle up to a high even though you have it on low, and that would be the stove taking control of the situation to try and cool the stove down if it gets too hot. So if the stove gets too hot, it can override a low setting and actually turn it up to high momentarily to try and get the stove to cool down, and then it will revert to whatever the set point is. And the same is true down on the stove temp, low and high. And then the last thing that we go through is this toggle switch right here. Right now it's in the up position, which would be automatic. It would say automatic on yours. And that means that the stove is in automatic mode. It will turn itself on, it will turn itself off. If we click it down, we're now in manual mode, and that's the way that this stove was actually designed, would be manual, in that you can turn the stove on, but you'll see that the feed motor doesn't turn on. Feed motor is not turning on because it actually needs to achieve 180 something degrees to know that there's a fire in there before it starts feeding pellets. And in this mode right here, you can still run it on auto, but it's not going to turn the stove off when it achieves the set point. So it will be starting up manually, it will be running on high to achieve whatever the set point is that we have. Once it achieves the set point, it's going to drop down to the idle, but as long as it's in the manual position down, it's not going to turn itself off. Excuse me. And you can also use this mode if you want your stove to run on stove temperature, or room temperature, but you don't want the thing to turn off. You just want a high-low operation. That would be particularly useful if your stove is forever cycling, meaning turning on, burning on high, achieving temperature, shutting off, and then right about the time it shuts off, it calls for heat again, starts up, burns on high, then it goes to an idle. If it's doing that all day long, you're going to wear out your igniter. You're also not using your fuel very efficiently. And that's pretty much it. There is one other little hidden mode on this stove, which is if you're in manual and you're on stove temp and you have this knob right here, anywhere below 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, that is what they call summer romance mode. And that means that you can have a fire, and the fire will be pretty much taking the heat and sending it right up the flue and outside and not blowing heat in your face. So if you want to have a fire in the summertime, that's the mode that you use. Manual, stove temp, and anything down below 5. And that concludes our little lesson here on how these boards work. Bye.